Drenched in the pale light of an overcast Friday morning, Lieutenant Gabriel Reyes sat motionless on the same worn marble bench in Emerson Plaza. The world moved around him in impatient waves, coffee cups clutched tight, briefcases clacking, heels smacking wet pavement, but he remained steady, still, rooted like the bronze statue behind him. He had arrived at dawn, as he always did. A battered satchel lay beside him, its canvas corners softened by age, frayed from repetition. Inside it, a scrapbook, a velvet case, and a folded American flag wrapped in cellophane to protect it from the drizzle. A young city officer approached, barely older than the boots on his feet. Clad in a crisp, gleaming uniform, he held a look of superiority beneath his department-issued cap. "Stop loitering, old-timer," he snapped, his hand inching toward his baton. Gabe didn't flinch. He merely blinked up at the officer, lips sealed, spine straight. His silence, as always, was mistaken for defiance. "Last warning," the officer hissed. A few passers-by slowed but didn't stop. Then came the sudden electric pop, sharp and loud, the stun gun's arc breaking the plaza's rhythm. Gabe's satchel tipped over. The velvet-lined case clattered open on the cold stone, revealing its contents: twin bronze stars, a distinguished service cross, a silver star tucked neatly beneath them. A field citation, yellowed and sealed in plastic, fluttered slightly in the wind. The plaza froze. The officer took a step back. A hush fell. Strangers stared, not at Gabe, but at what had spilled before him. A woman gasped. A child tugged his mother's sleeve. The sound of traffic dimmed, replaced by the kind of silence that follows revelation. Not a word was spoken. No further orders barked. All eyes were now on the forgotten soldier, and the weight of history he had carried alone. He was 24 the first time he dropped from the night sky into enemy territory. The wind over Laos was hot and foul-smelling, full of smoke and metallic dust. Lieutenant Gabriel Reyes, fresh from Fort Benning and hand-picked for the 101st Airborne's Black Echo unit, had no illusions of glory, only orders, men depending on him, and the silent pressure of doing what had to be done. The year was 1971, and the war wasn't in the news anymore. It was in the soil, in the jungle, in the silence after the burst of gunfire. Gabe had a reputation before he earned his ribbons. He was steady, smart, and calm under fire. Never shouted. Never panicked. When other officers cracked from the noise and death, Gabe simply adjusted his grip, focused on extraction points, and made sure everyone had water. His men loved him for that. "Reyes doesn't flinch," they used to say. "Reyes sees it all and still moves forward." Their team was small, deployed for deep reconnaissance and sabotage in Cambodia and Laos, places they weren't technically supposed to be. They inserted in silence, marked targets, gathered intelligence, and sometimes stayed hidden for days before hitting supply lines or rescuing hostages. It was war in whispers. No fanfare. No medals out loud. Everything off the books, and yet the consequences bled deep. The mission that got him the Distinguished Service Cross was never publicly recorded. It was a hellhole outside Adapue, a covert POW site guarded by North Vietnamese regulars and Lao militia. His team stumbled on it during a recon sweep and realized that 5 American prisoners were being held in bamboo cages half-submerged in swamp water. Gabe made a call over the secure radio, but the response came down like ice: no extraction window. No authorization for engagement. That night, Gabe didn't sleep. Neither did his men. At dawn, he stood, checked his weapon, and said simply, "We're going in." No one argued. What followed was chaos. 3 men died in the first wave: Boone, Callahan, and Murrieta, all buried in the mud by morning. But 5 POWs walked free. Gabe carried one of them 2 miles through jungle to the extraction zone, a kid named Donnelly who couldn't walk from malnutrition and dysentery. They made it out just before enemy mortars lit up the tree line. Back at base, there was no celebration. A colonel met him with a reprimand for disobeying direct orders. Then, 3 days later, a sealed citation appeared under his door with the cross. Gabe said nothing. He packed his gear, attended the memorial service for his dead, and volunteered for another run. They sent him back into the jungle. By 1973, he had 8 confirmed operations behind enemy lines, 2 more medals, and a collapsed lung from shrapnel that had never fully healed. But he declined promotion. He refused command. When they tried to bring him into intelligence, he declined again. "I'm not coming home till they all do," he said once to a chaplain. "And if they don't, I'll carry them with me." He returned stateside quietly, flew into Dulles, and took a cab home with a duffel bag full of folded uniforms and a notebook with the names of every man he'd lost. No parade. No reception. Just the smell of winter on the wind and the sense that the world had moved on without him. The following Friday, he walked to Emerson Plaza. It had once been a park, but now it was mostly concrete, dedicated to public utility and municipal renewal, whatever that meant. At its center stood a bronze statue of a kneeling soldier, unnamed, rifle pointed downward. Beneath it was a wide stone bench, the kind you sat on without thinking. Gabe sat. From that day on, he returned every Friday. Always at dawn. Rain or sun. He brought his notebook, his scrapbook, his folded flag. Sometimes he read names aloud, softly under his breath. Other times, he simply sat, staring at the worn cobblestones, remembering the voices, the movements, the awful, beautiful weight of being the one who lived. Over the years, he aged quietly. His hair grayed, his frame shrank, but he remained dignified. Crisp shirts, polished shoes, no slouching. He didn't drink, didn't beg, didn't speak unless spoken to. He nodded at passers-by, offered the occasional helping hand to a mother with a stroller or a man fumbling a dropped phone. He was polite. Invisible. Except to the city. In 2009, a new ordinance declared Emerson Plaza a no-linger zone. Between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m., public loitering was punishable by fine. Enforcement was light at first, just warnings. But the newer officers, especially those eager to make quotas or impress their supervisors, began noticing him. An old man, sitting on the bench. Every Friday. Always the same time. Always the same seat. They asked him to move. He didn't. They ticketed him. He paid. They threatened him. He stayed silent. But Gabe had never learned how to leave a post unfinished. In time, people forgot who he was. Some assumed he was homeless, despite his clean clothes and polished boots. Others thought him eccentric, maybe even unwell. The scrapbook drew stares. The flag, wrapped tightly in plastic, seemed out of place in a plaza of commuters and coffee carts. Gabe didn't care. The bench was his altar, his memorial. The place where the weight became bearable only because it was carried in silence. Then came Officer Darren Lowe. Newly transferred, sharp-tongued, quick to assert his badge. He viewed Gabe not as a figure of memory, but as an inconvenience, a smudge on the city's image, a disruption to order. And though Gabe never raised his voice or hand, each week Lowe's tone grew harder, his body language more aggressive. One morning, he spat the words, "You're not special. You don't own this bench." Gabe looked up, calm as always. "No," he replied softly. "It owns me." But Lowe wasn't listening. He never had. The plaza became a battlefield of silence and suspicion. Every Friday, Gabe arrived at dawn, sat on his bench with the same satchel by his side, and opened the scrapbook as if it were sacred text. His fingers, once nimble with rifle drills, now trembled slightly as he turned the pages. Each one held something precious, a telegram marked, "We regret to inform you," a photo of men smiling through sweat and grime, a strip of ration card, a jungle map, or a yellowed newspaper clipping folded 3 times to fit. Emerson Plaza bustled around him like always. City workers swept gutters and adjusted parking signs. Office workers poured from the metro in waves, thumbing their phones, earbuds in, eyes fixed ahead. Tourists gathered near the plaza statue, snapped photos, then moved on without noticing the man seated directly below it. Gabe didn't try to be seen. He wasn't there to be noticed. He was there because it mattered. But Officer Darren Lowe didn't understand that. Lowe was 32, broad-shouldered, and eager to advance. He had studied city policy manuals like scripture, quoting line numbers and fine amounts. He walked with the chest-out confidence of a man convinced his uniform was a license for unquestioned authority. Gabe's quiet presence offended him. He viewed the old soldier as stubborn, a relic taking up space. Gabe didn't fit Lowe's sense of order. Worse, he didn't obey. The warnings began with clipped formality. Sir, you are in violation of Municipal Code August 12, 07. This area is restricted during morning hours. Gabe would nod. Say nothing. Make no move to leave. At first, Lowe issued citations, slips of paper neatly placed beside the satchel. Gabe folded them, placed them in the scrapbook, and continued reading. Then came the lectures. Lowe would stand with his boots inches from Gabe's feet, voice raised, barking threats in the voice of command. This is your last warning. We will escalate. You're testing our patience. Gabe, who had once walked through mortar fire with a bleeding lung, never blinked. By early spring, the tension grew thick enough to attract whispers. Vendors who worked the plaza noticed. The pretzel cart man, Harold, who'd been there 10 years, once muttered, "That old fellow was here before the Starbucks went up. Just let him be." But he never said it loud enough for Lowe to hear. One week, Lowe brought backup. Another officer, Officer Kent, younger and clearly uncertain, stood behind him as Lowe approached the bench. The younger cop looked at Gabe, then down at the flag resting beside him, wrapped like something sacred. He hesitated. But Lowe didn't. He barked his script, hand resting on his hip near the baton. Gabe said nothing. Lowe leaned in. You think these medals give you a free pass? His voice dripped with sarcasm. You think sitting here every week makes you some kind of martyr? Gabe met his eyes. It's not about me. Lowe scoffed and turned away, muttering, "Crazy old man," under his breath. The next week, he came without Kent. He didn't bother with warnings. He stood over Gabe, kicked the satchel deliberately, then smiled as if daring a reaction. Gabe bent to retrieve it without a word. That infuriated Lowe more than any shouted argument could have. The calm. The endurance. The quiet conviction. He wanted a reaction. He wanted resistance. But Gabe refused to give him the satisfaction. So, finally, Lowe acted. It was a gray Friday, cold and drizzling. Gabe arrived, as always, just after dawn. The plaza was mostly empty, just a few scattered commuters and a jogger tying her shoe by the statue. Lowe was waiting, already pacing, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed. As soon as Gabe sat, Lowe moved. No more warnings. Gabe glanced up. I'm not here to fight. You're not here at all, Lowe snapped. Then, in a flash, he reached for the satchel. Gabe held it close, shielding it like something fragile. Lowe yanked. The flag tumbled out first, landing on the wet pavement. The scrapbook followed, pages fanning out like feathers in the wind. And then the velvet case hit the stone with a dull thud, latches popping open, metals spilling across the ground. For one brief moment, time froze. A low buzz of electricity snapped the air, Lowe's stun gun now raised, primed, glowing blue. The jogger screamed. A tourist turned mid-photo. Gabe, still seated, raised one hand slowly in peace. And then the crack, sharp, violent, unmistakable. The stun gun discharged. Gabe's body stiffened, then slumped against the bench. The plaza fell silent. It wasn't the stun gun sound that did it, it was the sight of what lay on the ground. The bronze stars. The Distinguished Service Cross. The Silver Star, still clipped to its original commendation sheet. The Field Citation, yellowed and sealed, flapping slightly in the wind. A map stained with mud and blood. A black and white photo of 12 young men in jungle gear, smiling through exhaustion. Officer Lowe stood above it all, breathing hard. Slowly, he looked around, and for the first time, he noticed the eyes. People were watching. Claire Thompson, a local artist with a keen eye and a tendency to document street life, had been live-streaming the plaza for her Faces of Place series. Her camera had captured everything, the officer's aggression, the fall of the satchel, the medals, the shot. Her live stream, usually followed by a few hundred local artists and civic nerds, was now climbing in views by the second. Across the street, a young man in desert camo froze mid-step. His name was Rick Delgado, a Marine freshly rotated stateside, just back from his third tour in the Middle East. He'd seen medals like that. He knew what they meant. And he recognized the patch on Gabe's jacket, the screaming eagle of the 101st Airborne. Rick didn't hesitate. He crossed the street in a run, pushing through the small gathering crowd. He knelt beside Gabe, checked his pulse, and gently gathered the spilled medals with reverent care. Then, without asking permission, he pulled out his phone and dialed the only number he knew would matter. "Fort Fairwood, Base Command," he said when the line picked up. "We have a situation at Emerson Plaza. You'll want to send someone. Now." The video spread like fire on dry leaves. Claire Thompson hadn't intended to capture a national moment, just quiet portraits of a public space where people, anonymous and unnoticed, carried the rhythms of a city's daily life. Her Faces of Place live stream usually garnered modest interest: subway musicians, chess players, protest marches, the rare wedding proposal under the bronze soldier's shadow. But that Friday, when the electric arc cracked through the mist and an old man's medals spilled like coins on stone, her audience ballooned from dozens to hundreds to thousands. She didn't stop recording. Her camera, mounted discreetly across from the plaza, caught everything: the twitch in Officer Lowe's jaw, the way Gabe clutched his satchel like a fragile heirloom, the precise moment when metal clattered and silence fell. Her chat window exploded with comments. "Wait, was that a silver star? That guy's military. What's this cop doing? OMG. This is real. Is he okay?" Claire's hands trembled as she typed a brief caption: "Unknown veteran stunned in Emerson Plaza while displaying medals. Live stream ongoing. Authorities notified." Then she tagged every outlet she could think of: local news, military forums, city council members. She didn't realize her stream had already caught the attention of someone much closer, and far more experienced in the language of sacrifice. Rick Delgado, still crouched beside Gabe, recognized the look in the man's eyes. Not fear. Not pain. Just exhaustion, the same kind Rick had seen in the mirror after his own unit took fire outside Mosul. Gabe's breathing was shallow, his hand trembling as it reached, not for help, but for the photo that had landed face down by the bench. Rick retrieved it first. 12 faces stared back at him from a black and white photo, each man posed in fatigues, expressions tight-lipped and youthful, the backdrop a sea of jungle. At the center stood Gabe, younger, leaner, but unmistakably him. Rick flipped the photo over. Names had been written in careful pen: Boone, Callahan, Murrieta, Tang, Leclerc. He looked up at Officer Lowe, still frozen, jaw slack, fingers twitching by his holster. Rick's voice was cold and even. "You just tossed a war hero." Lowe blinked. He was resisting a lawful order. He was reading names, Rick snapped, rising to his full height. "And you kicked his medals into the street." By now, People were gathering in clusters, shocked bystanders, cell phones raised. An elderly woman with a shopping trolley stepped forward and knelt beside the scattered medals, carefully collecting them and placing them back in the velvet case. Another man took off his cap. Rick dialed again. "Patch me through to Fort Fairwood Base Command. Emergency." It took less than 7 minutes. A black SUV barreled into the plaza, tires hissing against wet pavement. No sirens. No blaring announcements. Just speed, precision, and purpose. The vehicle came to a silent halt near the statue. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, MPs in crisp gear, but it was the woman who followed who drew every gaze. Brigadier General Elena Wong didn't bark orders. She didn't flash credentials. She walked with steady urgency, her posture perfect, her short-cropped silver-streaked hair glinting beneath a peaked cap. Her boots tapped softly against the marble tiles as she approached Gabe's bench, scanning the scene. She saw the medals on the ground. The flag, still in its plastic wrap. The stunned silence. The cop. And then, Gabe. For a second, she hesitated. Only a second. Then she moved toward him, knees lowering into a precise crouch beside the man who had once pulled her from a downed Huey under fire in Laos, cradled her shoulder while she bled, and whispered coordinates that saved both their lives. She saluted. Slowly. With purpose. "I'm here now, sir," she said softly. Gabe opened his eyes. Recognition flickered like a match struck in darkness. "Elena?" "Yes, sir. I told you to take the South Ridge." She smiled faintly. "And you told me never to freeze in combat." "I didn't." Their exchange passed mostly unheard, but its reverence radiated outward. Around them, phones lowered. Conversation stopped. Even Officer Lowe seemed to shrink under the weight of the moment. Elena rose, turned, and faced the growing crowd. "This man," she began, voice clear but restrained, "served in theaters that the history books still haven't acknowledged. He led Black Ops units in Cambodia, Laos, and southern Vietnam. His record is classified, but I can say this, without Lieutenant Reyes, hundreds of American soldiers, including myself, wouldn't be here today." Lowe stepped forward, face flush. "Ma'am, I had no way of knowing." She silenced him with a glance that could have bent steel. "You had every way of knowing. You saw an old man. You didn't look at what he carried." Claire's live stream was still running. 10,000 viewers. Then 20. Then 35. The moment went viral. Military veterans around the city began arriving, first in pairs, then in units. They didn't speak. They didn't shout. They simply stood around the bench, forming a silent perimeter of respect. Some wore full-dress blues. Others came in leather jackets and worn ball caps with unit patches faded by time. One young officer placed a hand on Gabe's shoulder. Another stood at parade rest, guarding the fallen scrapbook like a sacred relic. Within an hour, Emerson Plaza transformed. It was no longer just a patch of stone beneath a statue. It was now sacred ground. Gabe sat quietly through it all, spine straight despite the tremor in his hands, eyes fixed on a point beyond the bronze soldier's gaze. He had never sought recognition. But now that it had come, he bore it with the same quiet gravity he had carried everything else, with dignity, and the weight of remembrance. By midday, the plaza had become a living tableau of reverence. What had begun as a confrontation had shifted into something else entirely, something weightier, deeper, and unmistakably solemn. Gabe, still seated on his bench, now occupied the emotional center of a gathering storm of remembrance. Veterans formed a protective ring around him, not out of protest, not to shout or chant, but to bear witness. Silent, steadfast, and unsummoned, they came. Within 2 hours, city officials arrived. The mayor's press secretary, a trim woman in high heels and a blazer far too thin for the weather, attempted to control the narrative. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding, she began to the small crowd of local reporters who had filtered in. The city deeply respects its veterans. Claire Thompson, still live streaming, slowly turned her camera away from the speech and back toward the bench. There was the truth. Gabe Reyes, bronze stars gleaming faintly beneath gray skies, flag folded on his lap, gaze fixed on nothing visible. She knew the real story didn't need narration. It simply needed to be seen. And then the second SUV arrived. This time, it wasn't a base response, it was a direct dispatch from the Department of Defense. Out stepped two officers in dress uniform and a woman in a dark civilian coat with a Defense Intelligence Agency pin on her lapel. A chill passed through the gathering. This wasn't symbolic. This was official. They approached Gabe with practiced calm. "Lieutenant Reyes," said the older officer, a colonel with a squared jaw and white gloves. "On behalf of the United States Army, we'd like to formally recognize your extraordinary service and issue an apology for today's events." Gabe didn't look up. "Apologies don't raise the dead." The colonel paused. "No, sir. They don't. But they do mark the living." Beside him, the DIA representative opened a small case, sleek, black, and lined with foam. Inside was a medal Gabe had never applied for, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. His file had remained partially classified for decades. The commendation had sat in a limbo of red tape, buried under operations deemed too sensitive for public acknowledgement. Until today. Elena Wong stepped forward again. "Sir," she said, voice soft, "they finally declassified Operation Gossamer." Gabe's eyes flickered. The ridge? And the POW site? The whole thing? He blinked hard and nodded once, slow and deliberate. That burden, one he had borne alone, was now, finally, shared. And then something unexpected happened. Rick Delgado, the young Marine who had called the base, stepped beside Gabe and saluted. He held it for 5 full seconds. Not a show, not for cameras. Just a salute, raw, sincere, and charged with gratitude. Others followed. One by one, the veterans surrounding the plaza moved toward Gabe. Some placed patches at his feet. Others left challenge coins, ribbons, notes. No words. Just gestures. Symbols. Officer Lowe had not left. He remained by the edge of the plaza, posture rigid, hands behind his back. He looked smaller now, diminished not by force, but by understanding. Something had shifted in him, too. His eyes locked on the medals, on the photo of 12 young men from another war, and a shadow passed across his face. Eventually, Lowe approached Gabe. "I didn't know," he said, quiet, voice cracked. Gabe looked up. His expression was neither hostile nor forgiving, just tired. "That's the point," Gabe replied. "Too many don't." Lowe swallowed hard and stepped back. He didn't ask to be forgiven. And Gabe didn't offer it. Late that afternoon, a crew from Fort Fairwood returned, not in SUVs this time, but on foot, with tools and materials. Without instruction, they began cleaning the plaza. They removed the temporary barriers, polished the statue, washed the stone bench. Then they opened a small crate marked PLQ Reyes. It was a bronze plaque. Hand-cast, minimal, elegant. The inscription read, "Lieutenant Gabriel Reyes. 101st Airborne Division. Guardian of the Lost." Some posts hold themselves. They mounted it directly behind the bench. By nightfall, people from across the city arrived, some with candles, others with flowers. A choir from the nearby Veterans Center performed a soft rendition of taps using only voices. The notes floated across the plaza, carried by wind and reverence. Inside the bench's satchel, Gabe now kept more than his usual items. He had added a folded letter from the Secretary of the Army, the Defense Meritorious Citation, and a collection of the tribute items left by other soldiers. He never asked for them, but he accepted them with quiet grace. The mayor, sensing both danger and opportunity, arrived the next morning. This time, she brought no press, just a city engineer and a decision. Emerson Plaza was to be designated a site of veteran historic significance. No more loitering citations. No more enforcement during Friday mornings. The bench, the statue, the surrounding grounds, sacrosanct. Claire posted one last update on her stream before signing off. He was here every week before we noticed him. He read names while we rushed to work. He remembered the dead while we forgot our history. But not anymore. Now, we listen. Gabe returned the next Friday. As always, at dawn. But he wasn't alone. A dozen people sat nearby, in respectful silence. Among them, Claire sketching faces with charcoal. Rick Delgado, reading from a list of names sent by other veterans online. Elena Wong, standing off to the side in full uniform, head bowed. Gabe opened his scrapbook. He turned the pages slowly. He began reading. Boone. Callahan. Murrieta. Each name rolled into the morning like incense, each syllable a weight, a memory, a small defiance against time's erosion. And no one interrupted. No one told him to move. For the first time in years, the silence that followed his reading was not neglect, it was sacred. The kind of silence that listens. By the following month, Emerson Plaza had changed in ways no city ordinance could have planned for. The transformation wasn't loud, it didn't come with fireworks or marching bands, but it was unmistakable. What had once been a space people hurried through became a place people lingered in, drawn not by spectacle but by presence. Gabe Reyes still arrived every Friday morning at dawn, but now the marble bench was more than a seat, it was a sentinel post, a living altar, and a quiet monument to something that couldn't be chiseled in stone. The plaque installed behind him caught sunlight differently than the statue did. While the bronze soldier above still knelt in anonymous duty, the name below, Lieutenant Gabriel Reyes, anchored the present to the past. Visitors paused to read it. Some left flowers. Others left laminated photos or handwritten notes, often folded and tucked beneath the lip of the bench like prayers between stones. City maintenance workers had stopped cleaning that bench altogether. It was polished weekly now, not by order, but by reverence. Local schoolchildren, part of a veterans awareness program launched after Gabe's story broke, had adopted it as part of their civic duty. Every Friday before classes, 2 students, wearing borrowed JROTC jackets a size too big, came with cloth and polish. They greeted Gabe shyly, he nodded back. One Friday, a boy named Elijah offered Gabe a drawing. It showed a stick figure with a flag and medals, sitting on a long bench beside a smaller stick figure, also holding a book. "That's me," Elijah whispered. Gabe unfolded it, studied the lines, and smiled. "It's good," he said, his voice like dry leaves shifting. "Very good." The small things mattered more now. Rick Delgado began organizing the readings. Veterans from across the region sent names, some typed in long emails, others scribbled on postcards. Every week, the list grew. Gabe read them all. Sometimes Claire joined, sketchbook in her lap, catching the curve of his brow, the lines beside his mouth that deepened with each syllable. Other times Elena stood beside him, in uniform or in plain clothes, hands behind her back, eyes forward. The mayor never tried to turn the moment into politics again. She came quietly once, stood in the back, and left before the reading finished. She didn't bring cameras. And Officer Lowe? He transferred out of city patrol. The incident had left its mark, not just on his record, but on his conscience. No formal punishment came from the department, thanks to bureaucratic shield work, but the public knew. And more importantly, Lowe knew. He stopped wearing his decorations on duty. Some said he spent weekends volunteering at the Veteran Center near Fort Fairwood. No one asked him why. They didn't need to. Claire's live stream evolved into a new project, Names Unforgotten. Every Friday, her channel streamed the entire hour Gabe sat on the bench, whether he read or not. She added soft overlays identifying each veteran mentioned and opened the comments section only to first-hand submissions or verified family messages. The feed became a mosaic of remembrance. Private Luis Moreno, my father. He never spoke of the jungle, but he kept a picture of his unit on his dresser until the day he passed. My brother, Sergeant Raymond Foster, Kia 2004. Thank you for reading his name. My grandfather served with Gabe in '72. He never stopped wondering if anyone remembered. Now I know someone did. The plaza's stillness became its message. Amidst a city humming with haste and noise, Emerson Plaza grew into a weekly pause, an hour where strangers stood still not out of obligation, but need. Veterans who had long hidden their service began showing up, quietly, placing themselves within the orbit of something both deeply personal and universally sacred. One day, a former Army nurse named Tilda Monroe traveled from out of state just to attend. She had served near the Cambodian border and carried guilt for patients lost. After Gabe's reading, she approached him with trembling hands. I was there too, she said, unable to say more. He looked at her and nodded. That was enough. They sat in silence for a full 15 minutes, saying nothing, healing something. The military took notice as well. An initiative sparked at Fort Fairwood spread to other bases, honor posts, benches designated across the country where veterans could sit and remember without fear of being moved along. Gabe's story, once confined to a live stream and local legend, became a model. Cities with forgotten soldiers took note. Some designated spaces. Others reinstated ceremonies abandoned years before. The ripples continued. But Gabe never let it change him. He didn't speak at events. He didn't grant interviews. When a journalist from a national paper asked him for a profile, he simply said, "Tell them about the others." That's what the bench is for. The journalist wrote the story anyway. But she wrote it about the names he read, the items he carried, and the silence he kept. Each item in Gabe's satchel had meaning. The faded scrapbook with its fragile glue and ghostly ink. The plastic-wrapped flag that had never been unfolded in public. The velvet case that held his medals, now always zipped shut. A pocket-sized Bible with no cover, just dog-eared pages and a pressed jungle flower between Psalm 91 and 92. Every Friday, he unfolded them in the same order. Every Friday, he returned them in the same way. It was not routine, it was ritual. One bitter cold Friday in December, Gabe arrived slightly later than usual. Elena helped him down onto the bench. He seemed thinner, the lines around his eyes deeper. But his voice still held that clear edge when he opened the scrapbook. Boone. Callahan. Murrieta. Tang. Leclerc. Connors. His voice faltered on the last name. Elijah. Miles. The name had not been on any list. Claire looked up, eyes wide. Gabe closed the book gently. That one's from me, he said, almost too soft to hear. A boy I held while he died. Never got a last name. I gave him mine. Silence. Not absence. Reverence. When he finished, he looked toward the statue and said, "One day, this bench won't need me. That'll be the day it truly stands." Claire, stunned, simply drew. The wind picked up. Someone in the crowd whispered a name. Another followed. Then another. Like a chain of memory passed from mouth to mouth, voice to voice. Gabe leaned back, eyes half closed, hand resting on the satchel. The bench, now polished smooth by countless hands and time, seemed to cradle him like an old friend. Behind him, the plaque remained. Lieutenant Gabriel Reyes, guardian of the lost. Some posts hold themselves. And in that moment, no one doubted that it was true. He remained.